Bob, you want to comment as well?
Yeah, I would like to also emphasize that, for example, in Hungary, we also moved up the value chain a lot within a little bit more than 10 years. So the first commerce came to Hungary around the end of 90s. ITIDA, Sykes, some of the outsourcing companies invested at the beginning. And within this period of time, roughly 60 companies, major multinational companies, invested in Hungary, so they created more than 30,000 new jobs in Hungary. And among these companies, like IBM, they have 1,400 people, plus 400 Hungarian engineers in the field of software developments. And I really believe that in that area, Hungary has got a very good reputation, very high education level. May I mention maybe one other example, that Morgan Stanley, for example, they were looking for 25 PhD mathematicians in Hungary for financial modeling. And they visited some of the best universities in Hungary who are good in mathematics. And after the visit, they said that the education level of these universities are as high as MIT in US. And after that, they brought this activity to Budapest. And I think they have this kind of activity only in London and New York. And half a year later, they set up the Financial Shared Service Center, and now they have more than 800 people in this center. And also, I would like to mention maybe some other companies like Lexmark. They have also very high value-added activities, or HP, or ExxonMobil, Genpact, Cognizant, Citigroup. Even we have some companies from India, so the Indian companies started to invest in Hungary, like Tata or Satyam. They are working hundreds of engineers, and they wanted to be close to the market. They needed this multicultural language environment, and also that kind of education level, I would say, what we have relatively, it's really very good for such kind of high value-added activities. And I would like to also mention, maybe from quality point of view, that I think everybody who starts such an activity in a new country, I think it's very important how fast they are able to set up this activity quality-wise. What is the ramp-up time? And within this more than 10 years period of time in Hungary, you can find also very good middle managers, top managers, and I think that they speak maybe the same language what you use, and they understand the same under the sentences and words what you say to them, and that is very important, I think. We had some projects at the beginning when it was a learning process for the Hungarians also.
I have one very succinct question, very similar to what I was, because in Egypt it's a great jumping off point to be able to be supported, whether you're a European company or you're an American company or even an Asian company doing business in the Arab world. And the Arab world has a tremendous population, a tremendous growing demand, just like the Chinese, just like in India, etc. And if you had to look at the demographics of the sourcing business within Hungary, how much do those centers actually support Europe versus other parts of the world?
Well, I would say that the majority of them are working on the European market. We have some global centers which are working 7 days, 24 hours, supplying US, Australia, Middle East, Africa, etc. For example, Diageo, they have now almost 10 years presence in Hungary with 700 people, and it's a global center. They became the best major financial shared service center this year in Europe. And then some of the other companies like Exxon or Lexmark, I think they are European centers.
Because because the center of excellence there is important in Europe because of the diversification and the diversity. I mean, you have to almost be European to understand how Europe operates.
Yeah,
you know, an American it's quite unusual for them to do that, truthfully. And but you have an ability to understand that diversity of what is German, what is French, what is Scandinavian, what is Italian, and even from an Egyptian view, I think you have a better view of that than sometimes we do in our world as Americans.
Well, in Hungary, you know, we had a very liberal political and economic situation from 1990 when we had this political change, and close to 30,000 companies invested in Hungary, more than 6,000 German companies working in the country, 1,000 US companies, and from all over the Europe practically there are a good number of companies are there. And from the neighboring countries also we have a lot of experiences, because roughly 2 million, almost 3 million Hungarians are living in the neighboring countries. So from a cultural point of view and language point of view, we have really a lot of experience working in the European countries.
Okay. Are there any, you know, we're kind of dominating our own conversation up here. Does anybody want to ask some questions or add to the debate? Okay. So, keeping with that, okay, I think one of the questions that then I'd have to ask is, how is the economy, okay, Kirk, from your view, okay, because it's a global economy right now. Obviously, the stock market today, those of you that don't know it, did close again below 10,000. And we're hearing all of the information coming out of Europe now, okay, in terms of Greece, in terms of Spain, possibly, you know, Italy, Ireland, and others. So how is that affecting, you know, Kurt, your view and even your all's view of whether or not to offshore, not offshore, to outsource, or keep things in-house? Because obviously the currency fluctuations have got to be dramatic, you know, as we start moving across geographic lines.
Yeah, you know, I think for me the biggest impact of the economy was, you know, increased consolidations, right? So for our outsourcing strategy, it meant we were part of an organization where we wanted to be onshore. So that's the most direct impact. I think as I look back at the last couple of years, you know, 2009, I think the first half of it, I saw a lot of people just kind of pausing and not really making strategic moves, because setting up an outsourcing engagement is fairly labor intensive and can be expensive on the front end. So I saw a lot of people just kind of holding off on those strategic moves, and I saw shorter deals, contracts with more clauses that allowing customers to get out because there was uncertainty. What I'm hearing from colleagues in the industry now is that's starting to go away, that there's increased activity again, and that people are looking at some onshore options that maybe weren't viable before. So looking at some of the rural sourcing options where you can find labor pools that maybe aren't tapped, you know, if you're looking to do something smaller. So.
Okay, how is the economy now in Europe? I mean, at this point, because typically Europe does lag the economy in the United States. It usually follows. And so typically what we're hearing, what's the impact on Hungary? What's the impact in terms of the sourcing markets there in Hungary and probably in some of the other Eastern European countries? Yeah, what are you seeing, and how are you preparing to handle that strategy?
Well, it is a very hard time, I think, for the European countries, and mainly in Central Eastern Europe. I would say that we are depending on very much the Western European markets, and regarding Hungary, for example, the automotive electronic industry was relatively very strong, and these industries were suffering a lot. But the other issue, I think, regarding Hungary, that we were the first country when the financial crisis started. We got some financial aid from IMF and World Bank, and at that time we had a very bad image. Later on, of course, the other countries announced the same or were in the same situation, but because we were number one or number two, you know, everybody said that Hungary will be bankrupted and etc. 1 year later, all the consulting companies, institutions, they said that Hungary is the front runner, we are the best performer coming out from the financial economic crisis. Unfortunately, nowadays, today, we have also some problem, and then it's a kind of political issue, because we had an election 2 weeks ago, and the new government are telling one of the guy mentioned in one of the conference that we are similar to Greece. And everybody, is speaking about this sentence now in the news. And I really believe that Hungary, we have a very strong base in the economy. So the role of foreign direct investment is very important. More than 50% of the GDP is produced by them, and more than 70% of the export is produced by these companies. And these are state-of-the-art companies, very good products, etc. The problem in Hungary that the state was spending too much in the past 6 years, and this new government already announced that, and practically in the last 1 year we had a government which introduced a very strict austerity program, and I think that we were able to manage the financial crisis. Of course, the economic crisis, this takes a little bit longer time. But the goal of the new government also to reduce the taxes, and practically we have relatively low level of corporate tax, 19%. Also, we introduced some additional incentives, and we try to support really the high value-added activities, research and development activities, and we can give some cash incentive, tax incentive, and also training subsidy. Even up to 90% of the training cost can be subsidized. And some major restructuring in the healthcare sector and the education system, and the local municipalities financing, which also creates a lot of new opportunities for the shared service industry. That will help also the Hungarian small, medium-sized companies, and the government goes really to give even more support for this sector.
Okay.